light above the stove cast a soft yellow glow across the kitchen floor. I had just finished tying the last ribbon on the souvenir bags. Each one had a name. Each one had a keychain that said Aloha and Grandma loves you. The tape stuck to my fingers. My reading glasses slid down my nose. I smiled. Then the phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel and picked it up. The screen lit my face in the dim room. It was from Nathan. My son. You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep the trip just for her family. I read it again. Then again. No, sorry. No thank you. Just that. A reshuffling. Like I was a suitcase that no longer fit the car. The air felt heavier. The lavender candle flickered untouched on the windowsill. I did not sit. I just stood there, the souvenir bag still in my hand. I looked down at it. The thread I stitched into the fabric. The way I wrote each grandchild's name in my careful cursive. My hands began to feel cold. The refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance a clock ticked. I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the counter. He didn't call. He didn't lie gently. He didn't even say my name. Just, you've done your part by paying. That was the part that stung. I had imagined this trip for 3 years. I dreamed of James's photo at the head of the dinner table. The kids laughing barefoot in the sand. One last picture where we all belonged. I blinked. Then opened the drawer beside me. Inside was the printed itinerary. 9 names. I looked for mine. But it wasn't there. Not Marilyn. Not Mom. Not even Grandma. Not anywhere. I wasn't forgotten. I was removed. Silently. Softly. Like someone turning off a light and walking out of the room. And just like that. I wasn't invited anymore. The next morning, I made tea. Peppermint. James always said it settled the heart. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth press into my skin. On the counter sat the dream jar. An old mason jar with a faded blue lid. I kept it behind the flour tin. No one knew about it. Not Nathan. Not Tanya. Not even James. For 3 years, I slipped money into that jar. $5 here, 10 there. Sometimes from skipping lunch. Sometimes from returning something I liked but didn't need. Once I got $50 for selling an old rocking chair. I had sanded it myself back in '87. I told the buyer it came with stories. She laughed. I cried after she left. Every dollar I saved had a purpose. To bring us back together. One last time. James and I had honeymooned in Hawaii. We were 24. Broke. Hopeful. He wore a white t-shirt for days because his back got sunburned. He looked ridiculous. Like a ghost with a tan line. But he laughed. Oh, how he laughed. At night, we would lie on the sand, letting the ocean hush our thoughts. He said the stars felt closer there. After he died, I made myself a promise. Someday I'd bring the family back to that beach. I'd light a candle. Tell the kids about the man who built this family with his bare blistered hands. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember, not the man, but what he stood for. I imagined Nathan taking a photo of me and the grandkids. I imagined Olivia asking, did Grandpa like the ocean too? I'd say, he loved it most when I was there. The jar was nearly full when I retired. After that I opened a separate travel fund. I stopped drinking the fancy teas. Stopped going to the movies. I started tutoring online. English mostly. To kids halfway across the world who always said yes ma'am. At night my eyes would ache. But I didn't mind. Every transfer I made felt like adding a brick to something sacred. Not a vacation. A memory. One that would live after me. Or so I thought. I still remember the day I called the travel agent. Her name was Meredith. Soft voice. Patient. She let me ask every silly question twice. I told her I wanted something close to the beach. But not too many stairs. A villa with 9 beds. Flat walkways. Accessible kitchen. Tanya's mother had a bad knee. I made sure she'd be comfortable. I even asked if the dining table had enough chairs. She said 12. I whispered, perfect. I had a notebook. Spiral-bound green cover. I wrote everything in it by hand. Flight numbers. Allergies. Shirt sizes for the kids. I ordered custom t-shirts that read Family is Forever, 2023. Names on the back. Even mine. I spent an afternoon folding them gently, layering tissue between each shirt. When they arrived, I held James's up. Even now I could see his shoulders in it. Broad. Solid. I'd saved one photo to print large, the one where he's laughing, head tilted back, sunlight in his thinning hair. I was going to set it on the dinner table. Right in the middle. So he could be with us. I pictured us lighting candles around him. Saying one word each. I imagined silence. Then laughter. Then maybe understanding. Maybe Nathan would look at that picture and remember. Remember the man who taught him to ride a bike. Who stood in the rain during every Little League game. Maybe Tanya would soften. Maybe she'd see me. Not as a burden. Not as a guest. But as part of the root. The reason this family existed. Still, there were signs. Tanya forgot to add me to the family group photo at Thanksgiving. She said, let's just do the kids first. Then, just our little family unit. By the time they were done, they were too tired to take another. At Christmas, they all wore matching sweaters. Red with white trees. Mine was blue. I hadn't known there was a plan. Nathan just smiled and said, oh, you don't really do the matching thing, do you? But I did. I always did. I just wasn't asked. The week before departure, I cleaned the whole house. Not just wiped. Scrubbed. Baseboards. Window tracks. The kind of cleaning you do when someone might stop by. Even though no one would. I opened the guest room closet and laid out each gift bag. 9 in total. Little seashell trinkets, sunscreen bottles, gum for the flight. Each bag had a name. Each bag had a hand-sewn tag. I stitched every one with my stiff fingers. Threading the needle by feel when my glasses failed me. I wrapped the keychains in tissue, the kind that rustles like a memory. The lavender candle sat by the window. Unlit. Waiting. I had printed out the flight information. Double copies. One for me, one for Nathan. I highlighted the gate numbers in yellow. Added sticky notes, arrive early, kids may need time at security. I even packed motion sickness bands. Olivia sometimes got queasy on longer flights. There was a note beside the fridge. Don't forget James's photo. I had a special frame for it. Simple walnut. Soft corners. He looked so alive in it. That wide grin, the kind that crinkled all the way to his eyes. I wanted him to see the ocean again. Through us. One night, I sat down and drew a little diagram. The villa floor plan. Each name got a room. Nathan and Tanya in the master. Kids in the bunk room. Tanya's parents in the queen suite. Me in the corner room with the sunrise view. I wrote grandma, sunrise room, in blue ink. Then circled it. As if circling, it made it more real. The circle faded after a few days. But the hope stayed. Even when Tanya didn't respond to my message about food preferences. Even when Nathan left my just checking in text on read for 2 days. Even when the family group chat went quiet. Right after I asked if we were meeting at my house before heading to the airport. I told myself they were busy. Packing. Planning. managing the kids. I didn't let the silence take root. Not yet. Because sometimes, you have to believe. Even if you are the only one who still does. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the email arrived. I had just finished sweeping the porch. There were leaves everywhere. Even though it was spring, the house felt still. Not peaceful. Just still. I opened my laptop, the old one James used to call the turtle. It whirred, blinked, and finally came to life. I had meant to check a grocery receipt. Instead, I saw the subject line. Final confirmation. Hawa family travel itinerary. My heart lifted. Maybe it was from the agent. Maybe she had included me this time. Maybe they had fixed the mistake. I clicked. The document loaded slow. Flight numbers. Rental car pickup. Villa check-in. I scanned the list of names. 8 passengers. Nathan. Tanya. The kids. Tanya's parents. Her sister. Her sister's boyfriend. Not me. Not Marilyn. Not mom. Not even a blank guest name. Just 8. I scrolled again, slower this time. I checked the attachments. There were none. I zoomed in. Checked line by line. The villa had 8 beds. The dinner reservations were for 8. The luau tickets 8. The ocean view house I booked no longer had space for me. I closed the laptop softly, as if slamming it would make it real. Then I just sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Nathan once made me a birthday breakfast. He was 9. He had burned the toast. The eggs were still raw in the middle. But he sang, off-key and smiling. I had kept the crayon card for years. Mom, you are my sunshine. It faded, now buried somewhere in a drawer. I looked down at my hands. They were still. Not shaking. Not clenched. Just still. Like the air around me. Like something had paused. Or ended. Outside, the bird bath shimmered. The water untouched. I whispered aloud. They planned it this way. And for the first time, I let that sentence stay. That evening, the phone rang. It wasn't Nathan. It was Tanya. Her name blinked on the screen like it always did. Bright. Clean. Sharp. I picked up slowly. Hi, Marilyn. Her voice was cheerful. Almost chirpy. We're just wrapping up packing, she said. Super excited. I hope everything's set on your end money-wise. I didn't answer right away. My hand tightened around the tea mug. The peppermint had gone cold. Then I asked gently, is there anything you'd like me to bring? There was a pause. A quiet, sharp silence. Like she hadn't expected the question. Or had hoped it wouldn't come. Bring, she repeated. I kept my voice steady. Games for the kids. Or snacks for the flight. You know Olivia sometimes gets motion sick. Another pause. Then her tone shifted. Still polite. Still smiling. But with edges now. Oh no. You don't need to bring anything. We've got it all handled. She continued, breezy and firm. In fact, Nathan and I were thinking, it might be best if you use this time to rest. Stay home, focus on you. I blinked. The words hung in the air untouched. I looked at the candle by the window. Lavender. Unlit. My voice barely came. Oh. She filled the silence again. We know how much this trip meant to you. And honestly, we wouldn't be going without your support. So thank you. Thank you. But stay behind. Thank you. But don't come. I forced a smile she couldn't see. And said I understand. We ended the call. I sat there long after. The sun dipped behind the trees. Light curled across the counter. I traced a circle in the condensation on my mug. Again and again. No one had yelled. No one had said, "You are not wanted." But the message was clear. Not forgotten. Just not included. Excluded softly. Permanently. Wrapped in politeness. Like a gift I never asked for. After the call, I did not cry. I just sat. The silence of the house was familiar. But that night it felt heavier. Like it had something to say. I walked to the hallway closet, reached up, and pulled down the small gray fireproof box. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside were documents wrapped in care. James's will. Our marriage certificate. The deed to this house. And tucked inside a blue envelope. All the paperwork for the travel fund. I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The wood still smelled faintly of lemon oil. There it was. My name printed clearly at the top. Account holder Marilyn Rose Monroe, authorized users none. No co-signers. No shared access. No alternate accounts. Just me. I flipped through each page. Flight bookings. Villa payments. Rental car reservations. Excursions. Dining deposits. Each one linked to 6 cards. All of them drawing from the same fund. The one I had built dollar by dollar for 3 years. Not Nathan's account. Not Tanya's. Mine. I opened the old laptop again. It took a moment to wake up. I logged into the bank page. The cursor blinked like a steady breath. The balance appeared. $21,763.84. Still there. Still active. Still mine. I clicked on the tab labeled Settings. There it was. Transaction lock. Freeze all linked cards. I did not press it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back in James's old chair. The cushions sank just enough to hold me. Outside, the light had faded to that soft blue that comes before full dark. The bird bath was still. I looked at the candle on the windowsill. Unlit. Waiting. They had planned everything. Booked it. Packed it. Posted about it. Without me. But they had forgotten something. I had not given it all away. I still held the key. Not out of revenge. But out of truth. And I whispered. They think I am the past. Then I added, but I am still holding the future. That morning, I woke up early. Not because I had anywhere to be. But because I could not sleep. I moved slowly through the house. Folded the same blanket twice. Straightened the picture frames that were already aligned. The silence followed me. It hummed in the corners. It sat with me at the table. I made tea. Peppermint again. James used to say it calmed the storm. Outside, the wind tapped the glass. Soft. Unbothered. I sat at the kitchen table. The clock read 8:17 in the morning. Their flight was scheduled to leave at 10:45. They would be at the airport by now. Luggage stacked. Children fidgeting. Tanya adjusting her sunglasses for the photos. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. Hey, getting a weird error at check-in. Can you check the travel account real quick? I did not reply. 5 minutes later, another one. They are saying the card was declined. Multiple times. You see anything? Still, I said nothing. I turned the phone face down. 10 minutes passed. Then 5. Then none at all. Call after call. One every minute. The screen lit up again. Voicemail. Then another. And another. I did not listen. I knew the tone by now. Tension wrapped in urgency. They were realizing it. Not all at once. But slowly. Piece by piece. Like a puzzle missing its center. Then came a quieter message. A whisper in text form. Mom, I do not know what you did. But if this is because of the text, can we please talk? I set the phone farther from me. Then reached for my tea. It was cold. But I drank it anyway. The peppermint still held its shape. I looked toward the window. The birdbath shimmered in morning light, still untouched, and I thought to myself, this is not revenge. This is remembering who I am. Not a benefactor. Not an afterthought. But a mother. And mothers remember everything. By 8:30 in the morning, the messages had changed. They were no longer casual. They were layered in panic. Mom, please. Just call me. We cannot get the rental confirmed. It keeps saying funds unavailable. Then came a voicemail. Nathan's voice was tight. Too low. Too rushed. I do not know what is happening, but if this is about that message. Look, I am sorry if we misunderstood. There it was. Not an apology. Just a possibility. If. Maybe. Sort of. I let the phone buzz. Let it sit there blinking. The clock ticked. The same one James had fixed 3 times. It still ran 5 minutes slow. But it had never stopped. Just like me. They thought I had stopped. Stopped caring. Stopped noticing. Stopped mattering. They were wrong. I opened my laptop. Quietly. Deliberately. Logged in. Checked the account. The status still read. All linked cards frozen. Manual authorization required. Another voicemail. This one from Tanya. Hi Marilyn. Just checking to see if everything is okay on your end. I think there might be an issue with one of the bookings. Still smiling through it. Still polite. Then a pause. A sharper tone. If you can get back to us soon, that would be helpful. We are at the gate now. They were about to board. I pictured it. The family standing in line. Kids holding plush toys. Sunglasses on top of heads. Luggage tagged and ready. And no reservation working. No hotel waiting. No dinner booked. Because the one thing they did not pack was respect. And it turns out, that is the thing that unlocks the door. Not cards. Not confirmations. Not hashtags. I closed the laptop. Stood up. Poured the last of the tea. And said softly, I am still here. And they will know it now. Not through yelling. Not through vengeance. But through absence. The kind that finally matters. At 10:40 in the morning, Nathan sent one more message. We are boarding. Please call me. We can still fix this. I did not. I watched the sun hit the countertop just right. It warmed the wood. Made the tea ring glow like gold. Another email came in. Subject line, booking cancellation, confirmed. It was from the resort. Polite. Professional. Dear Miss Monroe, we have processed the requested cancellation of your villa booking due to the account freeze. All associated charges have been reversed. No further action required. I read it twice. Then I breathed. A long, quiet breath. The kind you do not realize you have been holding. They would arrive with suitcases. Printed itineraries. Smiles prepared. And find nothing waiting for them. Not because I was cruel. But because they had erased me first. And silence has weight. By noon, the phone had stopped ringing. For a while. Then one more message. From Nathan. Look. If this is about what we said, maybe we messed up okay. The kids are confused. We are just trying to hold it together. Can you please unlock the account? We can talk after. Still no apology. Still no ownership. Just a request. For money. Again. They wanted the trip. Not the healing. They wanted my resources. Not my presence. I stood up. Walked out the front door. Felt the breeze kiss my cheek. A neighbor waved from across the street. Heading anywhere nice for spring break. I smiled. Not yet. But soon. And I meant it. Not with them. But with something better. I walked to the mailbox. The same one James had painted in navy blue. After our second anniversary, it was chipped now. But still solid. Inside, a postcard had arrived. It showed a beach. Soft waves. A single chair in the sand. I turned it over. Blank. Like a fresh start, I tucked it into my sweater pocket. And thought, they boarded without me. But I never needed that flight. Because I still held the only ticket that mattered. My name. My worth. My yes. And my no. And this time, both were mine to give. That evening, I did something I had not done in years. I opened the old cedar chest. The one James had built after our first winter. It still smelled of pine and lavender. Inside were memories. Not grand ones, but quiet ones. The quilt my mother stitched when Nathan was born. The baby shoes he outgrew before his first step. A stack of letters from James tied with blue ribbon. I lifted the envelope on top. It was dated February 1979. James had written it while away on a work trip. Marilyn, it began. I know the days feel long. But you hold everything steady. You are the home we return to. I traced his handwriting with my finger. And I realized, no one had said that to me in years. No one had called this house home but me. They just borrowed it. Stayed in it. Left dishes in the sink. Used the space, but never saw the hands that kept it together. I sat on the floor, the chest open beside me, and let the quiet wrap around my shoulders. There was no anger in me. Not then. Just something colder. Something slower. A kind of grief you cannot name. It was not about the trip anymore. It was not even about the seat they took away. It was the decades. The dinners. The birthdays I remembered, and the ones they forgot. I thought about Mother's Days. How I kept the cards. Even when they became just texts. Sometimes, not even that. Thanks, Mom. Busy weekend. Love you. I used to reread them. Looking for warmth between the lines. Now I saw it for what it was. Duty. And I had confused it for love. I reached farther into the chest. Found a nightgown I used to wear every summer. Still soft. Still faintly scented with jasmine lotion. I remembered folding it carefully, the last summer before James got sick. He used to say, that blue one always looks like the ocean, when you walk past the window. I had not worn it since. Not once. I laid it gently across my lap. My hands rested on top. The tears did not fall right away. They came slowly, as if asking permission. I did not stop them. I let them come. Let them stain the edge of James's letter. Let them fall onto the floor we once danced on in socked feet. I whispered into the quiet. What did I do wrong? And the answer came, not from guilt, but from truth. I loved too quietly. I gave too easily. I made it all look too effortless. So they never saw the cost. I pressed my palm flat against the quilt. It was soft in places. Threadbare in others. Like me. Then I said aloud, I am tired of being graceful about being forgotten. The room did not answer. But something inside me stirred. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. And awareness is where change begins. That night I did not sleep. I lay in bed, eyes open, watching the slow movement of moonlight across the ceiling. It traveled like a quiet visitor, uninvited but not unwelcome. I turned toward the nightstand. There was a card still sitting there, unopened. It was from Nathan, for my last birthday. He had sent it late. It had no envelope, just a printed signature, and the words, "Hope you had a great one." I had not opened it. Not because I was angry, but because I knew there was nothing real inside. Now I picked it up. Opened it. The inside was blank. Not even a handwritten note. Just the company message. I set it back down. Not bitter. Not surprised. Just done. I walked quietly through the house. Stopped at the hallway mirror. The one James had installed himself. The one with the tiny chip in the lower corner. From when Nathan knocked it over with his skateboard. I looked at myself in it. Not to check how I looked, but to remember I existed. There I was. Lines deeper now. Hair thinner. But eyes still mine. I reached out. Touched the glass. Felt the coolness. Felt the steadiness. And I whispered, "You are still here. Even if no one looks at you anymore." Then I turned away. Walked back into the kitchen. Lit a single candle. Lavender. Its scent filled the room like memory. I did not need music. Or photographs. Or letters. I just needed to remember that I had once been loved without question. By James. By Nathan once. By the woman I used to be. That was enough. It had to be. Because the love they offered now was shaped like obligation. And I was done holding my hands open for crumbs. I sat at the table. Let the candle burn. I watched its flame dance, and thought about all the rooms I had lit for others. All the meals, all the gifts, all the words held back. So they could speak first. I had loved in silence. So long. They forgot I had a voice. But that silence had formed a backbone. One they never bothered to see. I pressed my fingers into the wood grain of the table. It had scratches now. A mark from every year. Each groove a story. And I thought, this is not where my life ends. This is where I begin telling it for myself. No more waiting to be seen. No more hoping to be chosen. I am here. I choose me. And somewhere, that knowledge planted itself, like a seed. Quiet. But rooted. I stood up. Blew out the candle. And let the dark come gently. The next morning, I opened the kitchen cabinet. There behind the flour and old recipe Saturday, the mason jar. I had labeled it with a single word, dream. No one else knew. Not even James. Every time I skipped something small, a new blouse, a movie ticket, I folded the cash and tucked it inside. $5. 10. Sometimes only coins. But it grew. Quietly. Steadily. Like hope. I opened the lid. Inside bills wrapped in soft rubber bands. Faded. Smelling faintly of cinnamon and dust. I poured them onto the table. Counted with care. Then I opened my laptop. Logged into the travel fund account. The number stared back at me, $21,763.84. I had memorized it. But today it felt different. It did not feel like a loss. It felt like possibility. For the first time, I saw that money not as what they stole, but as what I still held. What I could choose to do with. For myself, I closed the bank tab. Opened a blank document. Typed a title at the top. Those who were forgotten. Then I began to list names. Carol from church. Beverly, my old neighbor. Frances, who brings her husband's photo to Bible study. Louise, who raised her grandchildren but was not invited to graduation. Nora, who once said, "The worst part of aging is the invisibility." Each name I typed felt like a heartbeat. These were not pity cases. They were women like me. Strong. Steady. Erased. I made tea. Saturday in silence. Let their names glow on the screen. Not as guests, but as possibilities. The radio hummed from the shelf. Static at first. Then the voice of a woman. Old country music, playing soft. It reminded me of a drive James and I took through Tennessee in '86. He sang off key. We got lost twice. But we laughed. That was the thing. We laughed. And now, maybe it was time to laugh again. Not with those who forgot me, but with those who never stopped seeing me. Or each other. I saved the file. Closed the laptop. And whispered, "It begins." I picked up the old phone in the hallway. Still corded. Still beige. Still reliable. I ran my finger over the numbers. Each one a memory. I dialed the first. Carol. Her voice cracked when she answered. Like the day itself had surprised her. "Hello. It's Marilyn," I said gently. "From Tuesday group." A pause. Then oh, my. Yes. How are you? "I'm thinking of going to the ocean," I said. "Would you come if I invited you?" Another pause. Longer this time. Her voice shrank. "As in, me?" "Yes. You." She whispered it. Oh my. That was the first call. The second was Beverly. She laughed out loud when I asked. "Girl, the last time I left the county was for a funeral." "Then it's time to go for something better," I replied. I made 6 calls that day. All answered. All quiet at first. Then slowly, widening like windows, letting in light. Each woman asked the same thing. But why me? And I told them the truth. Because someone should. Because someone should see them. Celebrate them. Let them pack a bag for once. Not just unpack someone else's burdens. After the last call, I sat at the kitchen table. Pulled out an old photo album. The green one with peeling corners. Inside were pictures no one asked about anymore. Me in a blue dress. Holding Nathan as a baby. James kissing my cheek. Under a string of Christmas lights. Snapshots of people who used to look at me. Like I mattered. I turned the pages slowly. Letting the silence hold space for everything unsaid. Then I closed the album. Set it aside. And opened my calendar. 7 days. 1 villa. No tags. No matching outfits. Just names. Real names. Spoken aloud again. I wrote them in soft pen. Carol. Beverly. Francis. Louise. Nora. Denise. Then I paused. Looked at the empty line beneath. And wrote one more. Marilyn. Not as a host. Not as a servant. But as someone who belonged at the table. Who had something to say. And this time was going to say it. That evening, I spread a map across the dining table. The same table James had sanded smooth one winter. When the legs began to splinter. It still wobbled slightly in the corner. But it held. Like I did. I circled a spot on the map. The southern coast. Near the water. Not too crowded. Not too fancy. Just enough space for 7 women. And 1 long dinner table. I called the travel agent. Her voice perked up when she recognized my number. "Back again, Mrs. Monroe." "Yes," I said. but this time for different names. I read them slowly, carefully spelling each. She didn't ask why. She just said, "We'll make it beautiful." Next I ordered linen napkins. Not white, but soft coral and sea green. Gentle colors. Like rest. Like grace. Then I wrote 6 notes by hand. Short ones. Just enough to say, "You matter. You're wanted. Pack light. Bring something you've never told anyone." Because we would make room for stories. I found a picture of James. Not the one in a suit. The one where he was laughing, eyes squinting at the sun. I placed it on the table. Watched how the last light caught the frame. He always said a good table isn't about how it looks. It's about who's at it. And this time, everyone at it would know they were seen. I thought about Tanya. Her polished table. Her curated invitations. All surface. No soul. And I no longer envied it. I had something better now. I stood in front of the mirror in the living room. The one with the tiny crack in the top corner. From when I tried to hang it alone. My reflection looked softer somehow. Not younger. Not smoother. Just steadier. I smiled. Not the smile for photos. Not the one for company. But the kind that says I remember who I am now. Outside the wind moved the trees. Not loud. Just enough to remind me that things grow even when no one is watching. I reached for my suitcase. The old one. With the fraying handle. And I began to pack. Not out of desperation. Not for their approval. But for joy. For once I was not being left behind. I was simply choosing a better direction. Have you ever reached a point where kindness was no longer enough? Where silence, once noble, became too heavy to carry? We invite you to share your moment below. You are not invisible here. Your story matters. Always. The morning after the final call I made oatmeal. Not because I was hungry, but because the motion felt steady. Stirring. Waiting. Breathing. I sat by the window. Notebook open. Pen in hand. The page read, "Departure day, Saturday, flight 10:45 in the morning, gate 17. I circled the time in blue ink. 2 hours early. That meant check-in would begin around 8:15. That would be the moment. The cards they carried, each tied to the fund I created, would try to process. And they would fail. Unless I intervened. Unless I allowed it. I looked down at my hand. Still steady. Still mine. I tapped my finger against the table. Tick. Tick. Not out of nervousness. Out of knowing. Because this time, they would learn what absence really meant. Not in a tantrum. Not in a confrontation. But in the quiet, refusal to keep giving, where nothing had ever been returned. I opened the laptop. It blinked slowly to life. The travel fund page glowed softly on the screen. Balance $21,763.84. Still untouched. Still whole. I moved to the Settings tab. Paused. Hovered over the toggle. Transaction lock. Freeze all outgoing charges, it read. All linked cards will be disabled. Manual owner verification required to resume. My cursor hovered. I did not click. Not yet. Because I wanted to give them one last chance to remember me. Not the money. Not the bookings. Not the breakfast baskets. Me. I picked up the phone. Typed a message. Let me know if you need anything for the trip. I can pack snacks for the kids. Simple. Soft. A bridge. I hit send. Watched as the message delivered. Then turned blue. Read. And waited. 1 hour. 2. Nothing. No, thank you. No, we're good. Not even a thumbs up. Just silence. And I understood. It was not forgetfulness. It was intention. I was not overlooked. I was unseen by choice. They had not forgotten me. They had removed me, piece by piece, excuse by excuse. Until the woman who once baked birthday cakes and stayed up all night with fevers was now just an account. And now I would remove myself from their expectations. On my own terms, I rose before the sun. The house still wrapped in quiet. No birds yet. No traffic. Just the hush of early breath. I made tea peppermint. James's favorite. Mine now by comfort. I sat in his old chair. The one he called the lookout. Still creaking. Still solid. The cup warmed my hands. But it was the decision warming my chest. Across the room, the laptop waited. The screen dark. But not asleep. Like it knew what was coming. I walked over. Sat down. Opened the lid. The travel fund page reappeared. Same numbers. Same blinking cursor. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I hovered again over the toggle. Transaction lock. I read the words aloud. Not for drama. For clarity. All linked cards will be disabled. Manual owner verification required to resume. I pressed my finger lightly on the mouse. Then, firmly. 1 click. A soft confirmation. Freeze mode activated. That was it. No sound. No email sent. No trumpet announcing my refusal. Just silence. And power. They would feel it later. At the gate. At the counter. At the car rental desk. Not through anger. But absence. Not through protest. But policy. And I would not be watching. I closed the laptop. Stood up. Carried the tea to the sink. Washed the cup gently. Dried it with the cloth embroidered by my grandmother. A gift on my wedding day. Still intact. Still useful. Like me. I walked to the hallway mirror. Touched my face in the reflection. I looked older today. But not smaller. Not erased. I whispered. They taught me how to disappear. Now I'll teach myself how to remain. Then I turned off the light. Not in mourning. But in completion. The decision had been made. Not out of spite. But out of self-respect. And for the first time in years I felt like the only person I needed permission from was me. The clock in the kitchen struck 7. Its slow, dependable tick had followed me through 3 decades of meals, birthdays, and disappointments. I listened now. Not for the hour. But for the rhythm. It reminded me. That time keeps moving. Whether we're ready or not. I sat at the table. Pulled my suitcase closer. Ran my hand along the zipper. This bag was supposed to carry hope. Now it would carry something else. Resolution. Inside, I packed linen pants, a pale blue dress I hadn't worn in years, and James's photograph, still in its soft walnut frame. Not for them. For me. To remember what love looked like. Before it became conditional. I added a book of poems, my reading glasses, and the candle. Lavender. His scent. My signal. Then I stood. And walked to the cabinet. I reached for a box, labeled Misk, in fading black marker. Inside were old postcards. I found one blank. Wrote across the back. You do not owe anyone your silence. Especially those who mistake it for weakness. I folded it once. Placed it inside my journal. I would leave it on the nightstand, in the villa, for whoever needed it next. Because silence had shaped me, but I would no longer live inside it. That afternoon, the first message arrived. Nathan. Hey Mom, getting a strange error at check-in. Can you check the account? I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, Mom, the card's not working. Did something happen? Still I stayed still. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Just a deep, quiet knowing. Then the phone rang. Tanya's name lit up. I watched it blink once, twice, then go dark. Another message. Please call us. The kids are confused. We can't get through. But this time I didn't explain. Didn't justify. I simply whispered. I gave you everything. You mistook it for nothing. Now you can feel the cost. I walked outside. Let the sun warm my shoulders. The wind moved gently through the trees, and I said without looking back, this is the last time I wait to be seen. Then I took one step forward. And then another. At exactly 8:27 in the morning, my phone buzzed. One vibration. Then another. Nathan. Getting a weird error at check-in. Can you check the travel account real quick? I set the phone face down. The steam from my tea rose slowly. I took a sip. Mint. Still warm. 3 more messages came. All within 5 minutes. The card's declining. We can't get the rental car. Is something wrong with the account? I did not move. I watched the sunlight stretch across the floor, warming the spot where James used to nap on Sunday afternoons. They were at the airport now. I imagined Tanya tight-lipped, holding her purse with both hands. Her mother asking questions. Nathan sweating. Pretending to stay calm. The kids confused. Not their fault. None of this was. Then came the voicemail. Mom, it's me. Just give me a quick call, please. Okay, I don't know what's going on. But we can't get the boarding passes. His voice was softer now. Not angry. Not kind. Just uncertain. I listened. Then deleted it. 10 minutes passed. Another message. Tanya this time. Hi Marilyn. Just wondering if maybe there's been some mistake. Could you take a look when you get a second? Still cheerful. Still pretending. They had planned this trip. Without my name on anything. Not the bookings. Not the invites. Only the bill had my name. And now, so did the authority to stop it. I opened the email app. Scrolled past promotions. Past grocery receipts. There it was. Subject villa booking, cancellation confirmed. I read the line 3 times. We have processed the requested cancellation due to account freeze. Charges have been reversed. To the primary owner. No apologies. No dispute. Just finality. Like a door quietly clicking shut. The villa was no longer theirs. Because it had never truly been. They had packed bags. Planned outfits. Posted hashtags. But they had never packed gratitude. Never planned room for me. And now they were airborne, with nowhere to land. And I was grounded. But not broken. I had my tea. My silence. My name still whole. And the kind of peace you only find when you stop begging to be invited. By noon I had over 20 missed calls. Nathan. Tanya. Even her mother. Voicemails too. I didn't listen to them. I went for a walk instead. The air was warm. The sidewalk cracked in familiar places. A neighbor waved. Heading anywhere for spring break. I smiled. Not yet. But soon. When I returned, the phone had stopped ringing. One new message blinked on the screen. From Nathan. Look. If this was about the text, maybe we messed up. Okay, things got twisted. He went on. Tanya says by the way. She didn't mean to exclude you like that. She just wanted the trip to feel a certain way. You know how she is. Excuses. Wrapped in soft words. Still no apology. Still no truth. Then the ask. We're in a bit of a bind financially. Had to rebook a bunch of stuff. It's kind of snowballing now. So, could you maybe consider returning the original deposit? Or even part of it? I stared at the screen. They did not want healing. They wanted help. Not restoration. Just refund. Not connection. Only convenience. I scrolled back. Reread his message. Each word like damp wood, heavy, swollen, hollow. I thought about the word deposit. As if they had invested something. They hadn't. No calls. No dinners. No shared planning. Only assumption. That I would pay. That I would stay grateful. For crumbs at their table. I closed the message. No reply. I looked across the room. At James's photo on the bookshelf. The one where he's holding a fishing rod, smiling like he caught the sun. I whispered. They want the money back. But not the memory. Not the cost. He did not speak. But his silence felt like strength. I made more tea. Let it steep slowly. Watched the steam rise. As the wind nudged the curtains. Then I said aloud. To no one. To everyone. I owe no explanation. For finally choosing myself. And with that I turned off the phone. And turned toward. What came next? That night I sat at the kitchen table. With my notebook. The same one I used to track grocery lists, grandkids' birthdays, James's favorite pie recipe. I turned to a clean page. At the top I wrote. The forgotten women. Then I began to list them. Carol. Who raised 3 sons, and now eats lunch alone by her television tray. Beverly, who cared for her brother. Until the day he forgot her name. Frances. Still wearing her wedding ring 30 years after he walked away. Nora. Who once told me, the worst part of old age isn't the pain. It's the invisibility. Di. Who gave me a ride to the clinic and never let me pay her back. I paused. Added one more. Me. Marilyn. I stared at the names. Each one held in the margins of family stories, never quite center stage. I flipped back 2 pages. Found the old itinerary. Flight. Villa. Schedule. All still possible. Still mine. I picked up the phone. Not to call Nathan. I called the travel agent. Hello, she said, cheerful, unaware. I'd like to make a new booking, I said softly. For 6 guests. She asked for names. I gave them. First names only. No shared last names. No family ties. Only connection. Any special requests, she asked. 1, I said. I'd like a large table. Enough space. For every name to feel heard. She smiled through the line. You got it. That night I pulled out James's photograph. The one with his head thrown back, sunlight caught in his hair. I wrapped it gently in linen. Placed it in my suitcase. Beside it, the candle. Lavender. I had bought it. For a moment, that never came. But perhaps it was always meant. For something else. Something quieter. Stronger. I didn't sleep much. But I felt rested. Because clarity can do that. In the morning, I opened the blinds, let the light pour in, and whispered, "To be forgotten by them doesn't mean I disappear." Then I zipped my suitcase. And finally, I felt ready to go. The villa stood on a quiet hill, tucked between swaying palms and the hush of the Pacific. The breeze smelled of salt and hibiscus. I arrived first. The front door creaked, like an old friend, welcoming me back. Inside the table was already set. 6 chairs. No name cards, but space enough for every story. I unpacked slowly, placed James's photo at the center of the table, framed in walnut, strong, warm. Then I lit the lavender candle. Its scent drifted through the open window, like memory returning, without bitterness. One by one, they came. Carol arrived with a bright scarf and a shy wave. Frances brought banana bread. She had baked herself. Nora wore pearls. Said she hadn't worn them in years. Beverly carried a worn paperback. "You said there'd be time to read," she smiled. We didn't hug immediately. Just stood near each other. Quiet, grateful, unspoken understanding, thick in the air. That first night, we sat outside under the hanging lights. No performances. No small talk. Just women, exhaling. After decades of holding breath, Carol poured the wine. "To being seen," she whispered. Beverly raised her glass. "To peace that does not need permission." Frances didn't speak. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That was enough. After dinner, we lit 6 candles. One for each of us. We didn't say who hurt us. We said who held us. Carol named her 3rd grade teacher. Nora spoke of a dog she rescued. Beverly named a nurse who once brushed her hair in silence. I said James. Not because he was perfect, but because he never needed me to shrink, so he could shine. And now I didn't need that from anyone either. We walked the beach barefoot. No photos. No captions. Just waves. I looked up at the sky. The stars blinked like old friends. Not judging. Just present. Nora stopped. Said softly, "I don't think I've ever felt this quiet, without feeling alone." None of us replied. We didn't need to. Our silence was no longer something given to others. It belonged to us now. By the time we walked back to the villa, the candle had burned low, but its scent still lingered. Like something that would not leave, even if forgotten. The morning of our last day, I rose early. The sky was brushed with soft pink. That quiet kind of color you only find near the sea. I walked barefoot through the villa. The hallway still smelled like warm bread. Someone had started the coffee. At the end of the hallway, the table waited. James's photo still stood tall, wax from the candle now pooled beneath it, a slow river of lavender. I touched the frame. Whispered, "You would have liked them." I believe he would have. Carol came in next. Hair pulled up, bare feet soft against the tile. She poured 2 cups of coffee. Handed me one without a word. We stood there, 2 old women, looking at the morning like it was a gift we had almost forgotten to unwrap. Later, we gathered our things. One by one, we folded our clothes, pressed pages into journals, wrapped memories in scarves and paperback spines. Before we left, we did one final thing. On the back porch, I placed a wooden box on the table. Inside were small seashells we'd collected throughout the week. Each one carried a word, written in ink. Worthy. Still here. Soft. Seen. Enough. Whole. I invited the others to take one home. No one asked who wrote them. We all knew. Each woman chose a shell and held it like prayer. Then we hugged. Not politely, not briefly, but like women who had finally found where they belonged. Before I left the villa, I tucked a postcard under James's frame. It read, "This was not a retreat. This was a return." The door closed behind me, with a soft click. Not an ending, just a continuation. Back home, spring had arrived. The pear tree in my front yard had started to bloom again. Tiny white blossoms, like quiet affirmations against the still air. I unpacked slowly. Placed the shell-marked hole on my bedroom windowsill. Set James's photo on the mantel. Lit a new candle. Lavender again. Always lavender. Then I sat at the table, with my journal, and wrote. I was never the one left behind. I was just the one who stopped waiting at the wrong station. The phone remained silent. No new messages. No new explanations. But I did not ache for them. Because something fuller had taken root. Something gentle and strong. That night I made tea, pulled out an old poetry book. Read the page James had dog-eared 30 years ago. It said, "The ones who remember quietly are the ones who carry us home." I closed the book, looked out the window. The wind brushed past the wind chimes. He had hung on our anniversary. And I smiled, not because I was healed, but because I had stopped handing my peace to people who did not know its worth. What would it mean to write your own legacy without permission? Who would you invite to sit at your table? Because sometimes family is not who remembers your birthday, but who remembers your worth. And sometimes a trip that never happened becomes the one that saves you. I closed the book, looked out the window. The wind brushed past the wind chimes. He had hung on our anniversary. And I smiled, not because I was healed, but because I had stopped handing my peace to people who did not know its worth. What would it mean to write your own legacy without permission? Who would you invite to sit at your table? Because sometimes family is not who remembers your birthday, but who remembers your worth. And sometimes a trip that never happened becomes the one that saves you. The late sunlight touched the wood grain of my kitchen table, and for a moment, everything felt soft again. I've learned that legacy isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a name remembered in silence, and a trip taken with grace. What quiet legacy would you leave behind if no one ever thanked you? We invite you to share your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Your journey matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.